You know, we tend to think of dictators as these totally unpredictable, maybe even irrational figures. But what if I told you there's a hidden logic to it all? What if, behind that curtain of absolute power, most dictators are actually following a surprisingly predictable playbook?
So that brings us to the big question. How do dictators really manage to stay in power? It's not just about brute force or some crazy cult of personality. The real story, it turns out, is a super high-stakes political game, a constant struggle for survival that's played by a very specific set of rules. And how do we know this? Well, it's not just guesswork. It comes from an incredible study called How Dictatorships Work. A team of political scientists dug into the data from over 200 different authoritarian regimes since the end of World War II to basically crack the code of this hidden playbook. Everything we're going to talk about today comes straight from their research. So let's crack open this playbook. We're going to walk through 4 main chapters. First, how dictators get power to begin with. Then, the surprising tools they use to stay in control. After that, we'll look at the ultimate high-risk move, what we'll call the personalist gambit. And finally, we'll talk about why any of this matters to the rest of the world. Okay, let's jump right in. Chapter 1, Seizing Power. You gotta start somewhere, right? So when you picture a dictatorship being born, what do you see? I'm guessing for a lot of you, it's something like a military coup taking down a democracy, kind of like what happened in Chile back in '73. But it turns out that Hollywood-style scenario is actually the exception, not the rule.
Just take a look at this. The real story is pretty surprising. A whopping 42% of new dictatorships come from one group of autocrats kicking out another. Only 30% actually replace a democracy. So yeah, the most common way to become a dictator isn't by fighting Democrats. It's by fighting other dictators.
And a crucial thing to get here is who is doing the ousting. The researchers have a name for them, the seizure group. This is that small, inner circle of allies. Think military officers, top party members, who help the leader grab control. But here's the paradox. This group is the dictator's #1 asset, and at the exact same time, their single biggest threat. So, if the people who put you in power are also the people you need to worry about most, how on earth do you control them? Well, that brings us to Chapter 2, the tools of control. Once you're in charge, your main job is managing that seizure group, and the tools you use might not be what you expect. And this leads us to a really fascinating puzzle. Why do so many dictatorships bother with stuff that looks democratic? You know, they'll create political parties, they'll have legislatures, they'll even hold elections. We all know the whole thing is rigged, so what's the point?
Well, the answer has nothing to do with democracy and everything to do with control. These things are really clever tools. A ruling party isn't just for show, it's a giant machine for handing out jobs and perks to loyal followers. And those fake elections, they're basically a massive intelligence gathering operation. They let the regime see who's popular, who might be a threat, and where trouble might be brewing. And get this, there's a huge international angle too. A ton of money is involved. As this chart shows, since the Cold War ended, dictatorships that bother to hold even completely fake multi-party elections get way more foreign aid. The international community often ends up rewarding the appearance of democracy, which gives dictators another powerful reason to play along. Okay, so a smart dictator uses parties and elections to keep their inner circle in check and society under control. But for some, that's not enough. And this brings us to what you might call the endgame for absolute power. Chapter 3, the personalist gambit. Personalism is basically when a dictator decides, you know what, I'm done sharing. They start to concentrate all the power in their own hands. They push aside the very same military and party elites who got them the job in the first place, usually by playing them off against each other. The whole goal is to become the only person who matters. So you can really see the difference here. In a more institutional dictatorship, power is at least shared a little bit among a group of elites. There are some rules. But in a personalist regime, all bets are off. Power is all in one person's hands. Decisions get erratic and unpredictable, and that old seizure group is no longer a partner. They're just subjects, trying to stay in the leader's good graces. But this move, this gambit, it comes with a massive risk. Sure, it makes the dictator seem incredibly powerful in the short term, but it also plants a ticking time bomb at the very foundation of the regime. And it's a vulnerability we can actually put a number on. And here it is. Going full personalist increases the odds of the entire regime collapsing by more than 50% the moment that dictator is gone. Think about it.
By getting rid of all the other power players, the dictator has made themselves the single point of failure. When they go, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. The authors of the study put it pretty bluntly here. Life in a dictatorial elite is thus insecure, dangerous, and frightening. In a personalist system, that fear and insecurity is cranked up to 11. Nobody is safe. Everyone is looking over their shoulder. And that has huge consequences that go way beyond the palace walls.
Which brings us to our final and maybe most important chapter. Why does this playbook, this internal Game of Thrones, matter to the rest of us? Well, this flowchart shows the connection perfectly. A dictator personalizes power. Their inner circle becomes terrified of giving them honest advice. I mean, who wants to be the one to deliver bad news? So the regime starts making erratic, aggressive decisions, which, as you can guess, dramatically increases the risk of war and international crises. And the takeaway from the research is just that stark. Personalist dictatorships are far more likely to start wars. A classic example is Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. He had systematically removed any advisor who might have dared to warn him against it. The internal structure of his regime had direct, catastrophic consequences for the entire world. So that leaves us with one last, really big question. If dictatorships follow a playbook, does that mean we can learn to write a counter-playbook? Because understanding these hidden roles isn't just an academic exercise. It could be one of the most important keys we have to promoting a more stable and peaceful world.